You've probably heard that airplanes never dump toilet waste mid-flight. Every drop lands in a truck on the tarmac, so most people assume cruise ships work the same way. They don't. Somewhere out at sea right now, cruise ships are releasing hundreds of thousands of gallons of toilet waste directly into the ocean. That's the real story. Let's start with the scale because it's bigger than you think. The largest cruise ship in the world, Royal Caribbean's Icon of the Seas, can carry 7,600 passengers at maximum capacity, plus 2,350 crew. That's nearly 10,000 human digestive systems on a single hull. It's not really a ship at all. It's a floating city the size of a small town with 20 decks, 7 swimming pools, and more than 24 restaurants. And every single person on board is eating at those restaurants and flushing a toilet several times a day. Now put a number on that. According to a report prepared for the United States Congress, a large cruise ship with just 3,000 passengers and crew, less than half the size of the Icon, generates roughly 210,000 gallons of sewage on a typical one-week voyage. That works out to about 8.4 gallons of sewage per person per day, and somewhere between 15,000 and 30,000 gallons every single day for the whole ship. Stack a few days of that together, and you're looking at enough raw sewage to fill an Olympic swimming pool, produced by one ship on one vacation. And that figure doesn't even include the biggest waste stream on board. We'll get to that one later because it's the loophole almost nobody talks about. But first, here's what you need to understand. All of that waste has to go somewhere, and a ship in the middle of the ocean has exactly 2 options: hold it or release it. Below the waterline, out of sight of every water slide in Buffy, sits a hidden industrial plant. When you flush a cruise ship toilet, a vacuum system rips the waste through pipes in the walls and floors and sends it racing to holding tanks in the belly of the ship. From there, the sewage, what the industry calls black water, is supposed to pass through a marine sanitation device, essentially a compact sewage works. Solids get separated out. Colonies of bacteria eat their way through the organic waste, the same biological process a treatment plant in your hometown uses. The remaining liquid is disinfected before it goes anywhere near the sea. On the newest ships, advanced treatment systems go further, running the water through biological reactors, fine polishing filters, and ultraviolet light. And the water that comes out the other end can genuinely be cleaner than what many coastal towns pump into the ocean. When a ship is allowed to discharge, that treated water typically leaves the hull at around 13,000 gallons per hour, a steady, invisible stream trailing behind the wake. That's the brochure version. And on a well-run ship, it's real. Now let's look at the map, because this is where the story stops being an engineering story and becomes a legal one. The entire global system is built around one invisible line in the water. Pollution from ships is governed by an international treaty called MARPOL, and its sewage rules draw the ocean into zones. Close to shore, discharging sewage is forbidden. Once a ship is more than 3 nautical miles from land, sewage that has been ground up and disinfected can be released into the sea. And once a ship is more than 12 nautical miles from the nearest coastline, sewage that has received no treatment whatsoever, raw, untreated toilet waste, can be legally pumped into the ocean as long as the ship keeps moving at 4 knots or faster and releases it at an approved moderate rate rather than dumping the tank all at once. Read that again. 12 nautical miles, a distance a cruise ship covers in about half an hour, is all it takes for the exact same discharge to go from environmental crime to routine paperwork approved operation. No permit needed from anyone. No inspector watching. The water doesn't change. The chart does. The logic comes from an older era. When these rules were written, the thinking at the International Maritime Organization was straightforward. The open ocean could handle it. Seawater, sunlight, and natural bacteria would break down sewage faster than ships could produce it. So the job of the law was simply to push the discharge far enough from beaches and shellfish beds. And to be fair, for most of the 20th century, that math roughly held. Ocean liners of the Titanic's era piped everything directly into the sea, every sink and every toilet. And with a few dozen ships crossing mostly empty oceans, nature absorbed it. But the assumption behind the rule never anticipated what cruising would become. Nowadays, more than 300 cruise ships circle the planet, and the biggest of them carry more people than the ports they visit. In 23 alone, the industry carried over 30 million passengers. The environmental group Friends of the Earth estimates that cruise ships release more than 1 billion gallons of untreated or only partially treated sewage into the oceans every single year. 1 billion gallons into the same coastal cruising grounds, the Caribbean, the Mediterranean, Southeast Alaska, over and over again, season after season. The dilution argument was written for a different ocean. The rule, however, never changed. And here's where it gets genuinely strange. Because toilet waste isn't even the biggest thing going overboard. Remember that other waste stream I mentioned? It's called gray water. Everything that drains from the showers, the bathroom sinks, the laundries, the dishwashers, and the galley kitchens. That same 3,000-person ship that produces 210,000 gallons of sewage in a week produces about 1 million gallons of gray water in the same week. Nearly 5 times as much. And gray water is not the harmless soapy runoff the name suggests. Government fact sheets list what's actually in it: detergents, grease and cooking oil, food particles, metals, cleaning chemicals, even traces of medical and dental waste, plus a surprising amount of the same fecal bacteria found in sewage, because everything that washes off thousands of human bodies ends up in the same drains. Now here's the loophole. Marpol's sewage annex regulates toilets. It says essentially nothing about gray water, which means that across most of the world's oceans, those million gallons per ship per week can be pumped over the side completely untreated, at any distance from shore, without breaking a single international rule. Think about what that means. The most tightly watched waste stream on a cruise ship is the smaller one. The bigger one mostly sails straight through a gap in the rulebook. Now, to be fair to the industry, the picture on board has been changing. The newest generation of ships increasingly treats everything, black water and gray water, together in the same advanced purification plants. Royal Caribbean has reported spending more than $100 million installing advanced treatment systems across its fleet. And according to Friends of the Earth's most recent report card, every one of the company's ships now carries one. An independent sampling backs up part of the promise. Testing by regulators in Alaska found that these advanced systems genuinely perform well against pathogens, solids, and oil, though they're only moderately effective against nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, the fertilizer-like compounds that feed harmful algae blooms. So the technology exists, it works, and plenty of ships carry it. The problem is what the map does to the incentives. In most of the ocean, running that equipment properly is a choice, not a requirement. Holding waste costs tank space. Treating it costs energy, chemicals, and maintenance. Offloading it in port costs fees and time. Pumping it into the sea beyond the line costs precisely nothing. When one of the 4 options is free and invisible, you don't need a degree in economics to guess what happens under pressure. Which brings us to what happens when a company decides that even these remarkably generous rules are too expensive to follow. In August 2013, a newly hired engineer on the Caribbean Princess, a ship owned by Princess Cruises, part of Carnival Corporation, the largest cruise company on Earth, noticed something in the engine room that didn't appear in any manual. A hose rigged to bypass the ship's pollution control equipment. Crews have a name for this device. They call it a magic pipe, and its entire purpose is to make waste disappear overboard without the ship's monitoring systems ever recording that it existed. That month, roughly 23 miles off the coast of England, the ship pumped more than 4,000 gallons of oily waste straight into the sea through that pipe. The engineer was 3 months into his contract. When the ship reached Southampton, he quit, walked off, and reported everything to the British Coast Guard, handing over photographs and video of the pipe in action. What investigators found went far beyond one bad night. According to the United States Department of Justice, the Caribbean Princess had been making illegal discharges through bypass equipment since 2005, 1 year after the ship entered service, 8 years of it. And when senior engineers learned that someone had blown the whistle, they didn't stop and came clean. They dismantled the magic pipe and ordered crew members to lie to the inspectors who came aboard. The wider investigation then uncovered illegal practices on 4 more Princess ships, including a trick where engineers opened a clean seawater valve in front of the oil sensors, So the monitoring equipment would faithfully record clean water while the dirty water went over the side unmeasured. In 2016, Princess pleaded guilty to 7 felony charges and paid a $40 million penalty, which the Justice Department called the largest criminal penalty ever imposed for deliberate vessel pollution. The largest cruise company in the world brought down on this issue not by a regulator, not by a Coast Guard patrol, but by one junior engineer with a phone. Because you'd think a record-breaking felony conviction would end the story, it didn't. As part of the plea deal, Carnival's entire fleet, more than 100 ships across all 9 of its brands, was placed under court-supervised probation, with independent auditors and a court-appointed monitor watching. And in 2019, Carnival was back in a Miami courtroom, admitting it had violated that probation. The court filings covered more than 600 pollution incidents involving 76 vessels, among them a Holland America ship that dumped over 22,000 gallons of gray water into Glacier Bay National Park in Alaska, one of the most protected marine environments in North America. The National Park Service's fine for that particular discharge was $250. $250. The company also admitted falsifying environmental compliance records, and, in a detail that tells you everything, sending special cleanup teams to visit ships just before scheduled inspections, so that auditors would be shown a fleet that didn't exist the rest of the year. The federal judge told Carnival's chief executive, in open court, that if the company didn't have the environment, it would have nothing to sell. She approved a further $20 million penalty and attached a threat with real teeth this time: fines of up to $10 million a day if the company missed its new compliance deadlines. Here's what those cases quietly reveal, and it might be the most important idea in this entire video. On the open ocean, nobody is really watching. Beyond 12 miles, there is no inspector, no camera, no patrol boat checking what comes out of a discharge valve at 2 in the morning. A modern cruise ship is a sealed world, and everything we know about what happens in its engine rooms, we know because somebody on board decided to talk. American law openly admits this. A statute called the Act to Prevent Pollution from Ships allows courts to award a whistleblower up to half of the fine collected, and the crew member doesn't even need to be a U.S. citizen. Between 1993 and 2017, U.S. courts paid out roughly $33 million in rewards to more than 200 maritime whistleblowers, and an analysis of 100 of these prosecutions found that whistleblowers were behind percent of all successful cases. Sit with that number for a second. 3 out of every 4 times ocean dumping is successfully prosecuted. It's not satellites or inspections that caught it. The primary pollution detection system for the world's oceans is a junior engineer somewhere below deck, weighing his career against his conscience and a possible reward. And when governments have tried to put actual, permanent eyes on ships, it hasn't always survived politics. In 2006, Alaska voters passed a ballot initiative that placed independent observers, called ocean rangers, on board large cruise ships, paid for by a small per-passenger fee, specifically to watch wastewater practices in some of the most sensitive waters in America. The program ran for more than a decade. In 2019, the state's governor vetoed its funding, and the rangers came off the ships. Alaska's environmental agency still samples wastewater from the ships that discharge in state waters, and its own reporting reveals the industry's elegant adaptation. Nearly half of the large cruise ships visiting Alaska now simply hold their wastewater while they're inside state jurisdiction and release it once they're past the line, beyond 3 miles, beyond 12 miles, out where no permit is required from anyone at all. The waste didn't stop. It just moved offshore, exactly as the rules allow, into water that belongs to everyone and is monitored by no one. There are places where the rules have finally caught up with the scale of the industry, and they're worth knowing about because they prove what's possible. The Baltic Sea is now the world's only designated special area for sewage under the international rules, and there passenger ships are effectively banned from discharging at all unless their treatment plants also strip out nitrogen and phosphorus. Canada requires cruise ships to treat everything, including gray water, all the way out to 12 miles. Alaska's discharge permits for the ships that do discharge are among the strictest standards anywhere on the planet. And here's the crucial part. The ships comply. They install the technology, they meet the numbers, and they keep sailing those routes profitably. Which raises the question that should stay with you after this video ends. If the same companies can run clean in the Baltic and in Alaska, what exactly are their ships doing in the Caribbean, where most of the world's cruising actually happens, and where none of those stricter rules exist? Tonight somewhere, a cruise ship will slide past the 12-mile line and legally release what a small town produces into water, and no one is monitoring. The crimes make headlines, but the crimes are the footnote. The real story is the system itself, legal and visible, working exactly as designed. Next time you stand on that deck and look at all that perfect blue, remember, the most important part is what you can't see.